So Nora Constance Marino, Esquire, has been a vegan and animal rights activist for 16 years. She is the attorney who led the groundbreaking case, Alliance to End Chickens as Kaporos v. NYPD, all the way up to New York State's highest court, and put Kaporos on the map. Nora is a highly experienced trial and litigation attorney who frequently engages in litigation on behalf of animals and those who protect them. She speaks regularly at animal rights events, lobbies for animal-friendly legislation, and is a regular on the protest scene. Nora is the president of the Animal Cruelty Exposure Fund, a not-for-profit organization that exposes animal cruelty through mainstream media. Thank you, Nora, and I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, great. Thank you, everybody, and thank you for having me. So someone just posted, what was the court case? So the court case was involving chickens who were used in a religious ritual called Kaporos. Some pronounce it as Kaporot. It's pronounced different ways. And I was approached by another attorney back in 2014. It's been 6 years now. It's a little emotional because it's been a long journey, and Karen has been amazing through all of it, and it's because of Karen that I got involved. And before I get into the case, I also want to say that Karen Davis was one of the first speakers I ever saw on animal rights issues when I was a brand new vegan and animal rights activist back in 2004 or 2005. I went vegan in 2004, so it might have been within that year, and Karen Davis spoke about the plight of chickens and moved me to tears. And it's just a talk I'll really never forget. And so fast forward 10 years, in 2014, I was a lawyer. I'm still a lawyer, but I was a lawyer. I was a member of the New York City Bar Association Animal Law Committee. And Karen had put out a plea seeking an attorney who would perhaps take on a lawsuit against the city of New York. Because what was happening here was an estimated 60,000 chickens were being slaughtered every year on the streets of New York City in the name of a religious ritual. And I hadn't even heard of it at this point. I'd been a New York City activist for almost 10 years, and I hadn't even heard of this. So a colleague of mine had actually seen Karen's email and wanted to help, but she had no experience in litigation, and I was an experienced litigator. So she was like, oh, you're just gonna have to look over some stuff. Famous last words. It went on for 6 years now, and it's been overwhelming, but it's worth the fight, clearly. So we started looking into this ritual called Kaporos, and there had been protests at this ritual every year, which shockingly, I don't know what else to say, I really wasn't aware of them. And the protests were mostly from an animal rights perspective. And the police let this event go on despite these protests and despite horrific animal cruelty. These birds are transferred in these, tons of crates and these huge trucks that bring them into these areas in Brooklyn. The practitioners that engaged in this event are Orthodox. It's the Orthodox Jewish community, kind of rather an extreme sect. It's not all Jewish people at all, but it was this one particular sect that engaged in this ritual. It's between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and it's supposed to free the practitioners of their sins by twirling the chicken around their head, and then their throats are slit and their sins are supposed to go away. And this is done on public streets and sidewalks. So needless to say, when I heard about this, I was pretty horrified. And what Mary said about how chickens are the most devalued animal on the planet, that's such a profoundly horrible thing to think about any creature, but that's what we do as humans. We devalue other humans, but we clearly devalue animals, especially farm animals, and especially chickens. So I have no doubt if this ritual involved 60,000 dogs or cats, the police would be involved and legislators would be involved, but no one seemed to care that they were chickens, which is just gut-wrenching. So we looked into some type of litigation we could do to get this to stop, and we came up with the idea, the colleague, her name was Jessica Estroff. The idea was that we would approach this from a health violation standpoint. We're like, this has to violate some health codes. I mean, they're killing 60,000 chickens in the street. There's blood, there's feathers, there's feces, there's body parts. So We just started literally combing through health laws. I mean, there wasn't a book to go to, health laws violated by Kaporos. We just literally had to start flipping through pages one by one by one, through all these codes and rules and regulations in the city of New York. And we found a bunch that were being violated by this: health codes, administrative codes, sanitation codes, street activity permit codes. You can't just, I mean, I need a permit to throw a block party on my street here in Queens. How are you, shutting down streets and having 60,000 chickens, which, by the way, that number is estimated now at anywhere between 100 and 300,000 chickens for this event every year. No one really knows the exact number because there's no oversight and no regulation whatsoever. So no one really knows how many chickens are slaughtered. So we started looking into what was really going on and what laws were violated, aside from the animal cruelty issue, because we were thinking, well, no one really cares about the animal cruelty issue, maybe they'll care about human health. And we found a bunch of stuff, and we started putting together a brief and a complaint, and it was an extremely time-consuming ordeal. Someone just commented the police helped facilitate it, and yes, that was part of our complaint. We alleged that not only did the police allow this event, but they aided and abetted, and that was the language we used, because the police were basically assisting in all these laws being violated. So we filed first in 2014. That was really a rush job by the time we got it, and that case was procedurally defective for certain reasons. So we refiled in 2015, and that was much better. Our briefs were much more comprehensive, and at that point we had like 20 plaintiffs in the case. Many of whom were Jewish, and my partner was Jewish, because we were a little worried about the whole religious thing, and there were a lot of delicate moving parts to this type of litigation. This particular sect had made accusations of anti-Semitism before, when people tried to challenge certain things that they do or did. So it was really, really delicate, in a lot of ways, but I truly believed in this cause, and I believed in Karen, my client, and the other, Karen was as representative of the Alliance to End Chickens as Kaporos, and the other 20 plaintiffs that I had. And my 20 plaintiffs were residents, so imagine like opening up your door to your house for 3 days and seeing this brutal, gruesome slaughter going on. I mean, and it was really awful. I mean, I'd never been there. I went there that year to experience it for myself, and I literally felt like I had post-traumatic stress disorder. It was like being inside of a slaughterhouse, right there on the streets. There was stench in the air, blood in the streets. You could hear chickens screaming. It was just a really horrific scene that many dedicated activists endure every year, continuing to protest, and I have to hand it to them. I've been there a couple of years, but it's rough. It's a rough place to be. So anyway, we started the lawsuit, and I made all the papers. And I think that was the best thing about this lawsuit, was that it really put Kaporos on the map. I mean, the day after we filed, my phone just blew up with reporters. Like, everyone wanted to comment, everyone wanted to know more. There was a news crew at my office within 2 hours, with myself, 2 of my plaintiffs, Rena Deitch. I don't know if Rena's on the webinar, but she's been very, very active in this movement to shut down Kaporos, and Lisa Renz, who was also a plaintiff. So it was pretty amazing. It got a lot of attention. And like I said, I, as an activist at that time in 2014, had not heard of Kaporos. Now, like, everyone has heard of Kaporos. So at least we got that done. So the case proceeded in New York Supreme Court, which, by the way, for those of you who don't know, New York calls our lowest court Supreme Court. We're kind of backwards. Most states call their highest court Supreme Court. New York's lowest court is Supreme Court. Then you have the Appellate Division. Then you have our Court of Appeals, which is our highest court. So we litigated in the Supreme Court, which is our lowest court, and we had 2 facets to the lawsuit. We were suing the City of New York and the NYPD, asking that that the court compel the city, the NYPD, and the health department to enforce their laws, rules, and regulations. So that was called a writ of judicial mandamus. We wanted the court basically to step in and say, hey, executive branch, we're the judicial branch, you're the executive branch, we want you to, you have to enforce these laws, we're telling you to, as the judicial branch. And then we had another aspect of the lawsuit, which was to the practitioners themselves, where we sought an injunction and alleged nuisance, public nuisance, and a whole bunch of other things. It was a really complex complaint and a very complex order to show cause, which is where we would get the immediate relief. And we had oral argument, and this was in around, I guess, late August of 2015 by the time we got in front of the judge, maybe early September. Actually, I think it was early September. And the city now, in the meantime, made a motion to dismiss our entire lawsuit, or at least as it pertained to them, saying that law enforcement has discretion to enforce what laws they choose. And there's some cases that support that. So we had our hands full now with this motion to dismiss, and we had to respond to that. And at the end of the day, the lower court granted that motion, and our case was dismissed, and it was pretty terrible. And Kaporos went on. We filed a notice of appeal immediately, and but I remember going to Kaporos that year, and it was awful because the case was dismissed, and me just being the lawyer, it was just it was a terrible experience. But you move on. You got to pick yourself up and dust yourself off and move on. So we filed a notice of appeal, and we're like, okay, we're going to appeal this. And now the appeal was a whole other new thing that needed to be dealt with. This huge thing that needed to be dealt with. And we worked with the Alliance on that. The Alliance was great. Karen was great, very supportive, and gave us what we needed. There's printing costs involved in an appeal. There's costs. I mean, all these things cost money and time. Litigation is expensive and timely. So we did appeal. And when you go to the appellate courts, now you have the lower court, which is the lower level, and the appellate court is one level above the lowest court. And we call it in New York the appellate division. So we go to the appellate division. I have this great brief. City opposed my brief. We had a reply, and then that was set down for oral argument. And I think that might have been around the spring of 2016. I think we were in by now. It's hard to tell. The years kind of blend into one another. But we did the oral argument, and when you do the oral argument, there's 4 justices that stand above you. It's very intimidating. You're low and they're high, and they look down on you, and that's part of being a lawyer. You kind of get used to that. And we had a lot of activists actually in the courtroom, which was great, supporting our position, and residents as well who wanted this to stop in their neighborhoods. And we got press coverage of that too. And we did a great oral argument. I did the argument. It was a really good oral argument. I left there feeling really good about it. And normally this particular department of the appellate division, there's 4 appellate divisions in New York State, has about a 1-month turnaround on decisions. And a month went by, and 2 months went by, and 3 months went by. And I was like, what the hell? Why do we not have a decision on this already? And I could only think that they couldn't agree. So I don't know if that was good or bad, but that's what I figured. Like, they're having a hard time with this because this is taking way too long, way longer than it should. So we finally get a decision. I think it was maybe early summer of 2016, and we lost, meaning the appellate division affirmed the lower court, but there were 5 justices now, and we did the argument, there were only 4, which meant that it was 2 and 2, and they couldn't render a decision. They had to bring a 5th justice in to kind of the tiebreaker, and we had 2 dissenting votes. So in New York State, under New York State law, when you have 2 dissenting votes in an appellate case, you automatically get to go up to the next level, which is the New York State Court of Appeals, which is our state's highest court. And that was groundbreaking for me on 2 levels. One, as an animal rights activist and caring about this case, like as much as I did, which is probably more than any other case in my office. But 2 is also pretty profound just as an attorney, because it's very difficult to get into the New York State Court of Appeals. You don't get there as a matter of right. Like, you can get to the middle level as a matter of right. You can always appeal to the next level as a matter of right. But to get to the top level, you either have to have, there's only a couple of ways you can get in. One is you get 2 dissenting votes in the appellate division, or 2, you have to get permission. you have to say to the court, will you please hear my case? And most of the time the answer is no. They only hear, I think, 200 and something cases a year. There's 4 million cases filed in your state every year. So you can get a sense of how limited, the caseload is in the Court of Appeals. So to get into the Court of Appeals was, groundbreaking for me on 2 levels, both as an activist and as an attorney. So now it was like, whoa, now 3rd level, you're taking this case to the highest court. It was pretty incredible. So now we have to move on to a whole new set of papers and a whole new set of briefs and a whole new set of research and this and that. But we did it all, and the months rolled by, and we had an oral argument on that case. That was, I think that was November of 2018. And that was in Albany. So we went up to Albany, and there was a lot of people that went up to watch the Albany oral argument. I mean, we must have had 30 or 40 people in the courtroom supporting our position, and it was definitely intimidating for me. I never argued in the Court of Appeals before. Not many attorneys have. It's a very, like I said, it's a very limited forum. So it was thrilling in a lot of ways, and it was scary in a lot of ways, and it was exciting in a lot of ways. It was just a really incredible experience on so many levels. So we go up to Albany. I had a team with me. I had 2 other lawyers with me, so we had like a legal team. And we presented our case to the Court of Appeals. And the Court of Appeals has normally 7 judges that are above you. But in our case, one of them had to recuse himself because he had just gotten promoted to the Court of Appeals from the First Department Appellate Division, and actually was one of the judges on my case in the middle level. So he had to recuse himself. So we only had 6 judges in the Court of Appeals. And I remember thinking, what if it's a split? And I called the clerk and I asked them that, what if it's a split? And they said, well, then we have to bring in, another judge, but we'll just get the oral argument done, which we did. So we went up to Albany, and very emotional. And made the arguments. It was videotaped. It was, I'm told it was a very passionate argument that I put on. I think it was. I'm a passionate attorney, so I'm sure for this case in particular that, came through. And it seemed like a long argument, but, we time limits. I think it was maybe, I don't remember, 20 minutes or 15 minutes per side. Then you get a rebuttal. Made that argument. And then we had to wait for that decision, and it was more just like pins and needles. Like, this was it. There was nowhere else to go in the state once we hit this court, and it was a miracle we even got to this court. So a few weeks went by, and we got a decision, and the Court of Appeals affirmed, meaning we lost. But the odd thing about it was the Appellate Division. Thank you, Hope. Thank you. The Appellate Division, when they wrote their decision, so remember the 3 levels. We have Supreme Court, which is the lowest, Appellate Division is the middle, Court of Appeals is the highest. So when the Supreme Court wrote their decision, that was one judge, she wrote a pretty extensive decision. It was maybe, I don't remember exactly, but at least 15, 20 pages. The Appellate Division, middle level, also wrote a really good in-depth decision. They didn't agree with me, the majority, remember that was a 3-2 split. The majority's decision, it didn't fall in my favor, but it was still well thought out and had a lot of points and discussed everything. And then the dissent, the 2 judges that agreed with me, wrote a very detailed decision as well, going through all the evidence and all the arguments. And you have to remember, the case was dismissed saying that, we didn't get a hearing on the case. The case was dismissed saying, police have discretion, so you don't have a case. There's no way that the judiciary can tell the police what to do because police have discretion, period. That was the reason we lost. So now the Court of Appeals, which is really supposed to be the, creme de la creme of judges, comes down with this decision, and it was like a paragraph. It was like a page and a half, and the first paragraph was like pro forma stuff, so it was really like less than a page. And I was just like, this is it? This is your decision on this case? It had all this news coverage. It had been going on for 5 years. Or at that point, I guess it was 4 years or 3 years. It was very, very disappointing. I really felt like I'd been physically punched in the gut when I made that decision. And there have been journalists that have speculated that it was more of a politically driven decision than a factually or law-based decision. I can't speak to that. That everyone can form their own opinion on it. But the event itself is very political in New York City, and that was the problem. Why I remember during the appellate division oral argument, one of the questions the judges said to me was, "Well, why can't your clients go to their local councilman or woman, or go to their local assembly person or their local state senator? Why go through the courts? Why not go through the legislature?" And it was so obvious to me, like, no one's touching this. I was called an anti-Semite in legal papers during the course of this litigation, which was crazy. It was an ad hominem attack. It was terrible and inappropriate. So imagine an elected official who can be voted in or out. Like, nobody wanted to touch this. And there have also been articles written by journalists. Theirturn.net has covered this a lot. If any of you want to Google theirturn.net and just put Kaporos in the search bar, you'll get tons of articles and videos about it. There's been speculation that, this is a voting bloc, and it's just a voting bloc, which makes it completely political. And when the justice in the appellate division asked me why can't they go to their city council people, I remember, like, do I say it's a voting bloc? Do I not? Is that inappropriate? Is that okay? As a lawyer, you're always thinking, you want to be professional, and you want to be appropriate and proper. That's how the courts are run, or at least should be run. So I think I did kind of allude to the fact that it's a voting bloc and no elected official is going to touch this, which is why we need you, Your Honors, and that's what I argue. Like, that's why we need you to intervene here. And one of the dissenting judges in the appellate division was very sympathetic, and he even made an analogy. He was like, well, how would I feel if I opened up my door to take my mother to the doctor to this kind of scene? And he was actually one of the dissenters. So to get the Court of Appeals to come down with this very short, curt decision was really, really a punch in the gut. But life goes on, and I had to put it behind me, and the activists put it behind them, and we all just had to move forward. So the next thing that happened, and I only have 7 more minutes, but the next interesting thing that happened was COVID-19. So this year, I was sitting here, right where I am right now, as a matter of fact, in my dining room, and I was thinking to myself, God, I wonder what would have happened if I'd filed my papers, and now, during pandemic. I mean, would the decision have been different because of all the scientific speculation that COVID-19 is zoonotic and came from a live animal wet market, which essentially is what Kaporos is, a huge, unregulated live animal wet market in public streets. It's the worst kind. So I was thinking about that, like, gee, I wonder what would have happened. And I just had this idea. I'm like, why don't I file a motion to renew my lawsuit? Now it's 2020, so we're like 2 years post-Court of Appeals. And that was another thing. Can I even do that? Because this is a case that has gone up to 2 levels of appellate courts to the highest court in the state. Do I even have a legal right to file this motion? So right with the ideas in my head, I had to find out. So I'm on the computer, I start doing legal research, and lo and behold, you can file a motion to renew, which is where you basically say to the court, hey court, I have new evidence, and if you had had that evidence when you decided, when you made that other decision, that decision may have been different. So I used the pandemic as new evidence, and we got our toxicologist. We had a toxicologist expert in my whole 5 years of litigation, and this great expert witness. So I contacted him, and I was like, hey, would you mind if I want to renew this case? And so he was on board because he really believed in this matter as well. And I did this whole motion to renew, saying that this was new evidence, the fact that there's a zoonotic pandemic, and New York City was the epicenter of it, and this is the whole health risk thing has been turned upside down on its head. And court, you need to reconsider this. And that was just recently, because when did COVID hit? March. So we filed that. I reached out to Karen. I'm like, what do you think? And she was like, great, let's do it. So, and a couple of the other plaintiffs. So we filed, and I just recently got, and now just to let you know, that goes back down to the lowest court, the initial judge. That's how it works. So I do my papers, I do this intense brief, I have a new affidavit from the toxicologist, I have all this information, zoonotic diseases, all this stuff, how you need to revisit this. The health code should not be discretionary, ever. Look what would happen. We're in a global pandemic. The economy is destroyed. People are dying. Health codes cannot be discretionary. That was my whole thing. This needs to be revisited. And I knew it was going to be a big ask of this judge because, like I said, it's a very political issue. And now the case has been affirmed by 2 levels of higher courts. So I knew it was going to take a lot of guts for a judge now to say, okay, you're right, let's rehear this and reopen it. And because it was like it was like a train wreck of issues to anybody, to a judge, to an elected official, and even to the courts. There's just so many moving parts here. There were claims, just to throw this in real quick, there were claims religious freedom issues that was in the opposition to my position throughout this litigation, that it was freedom of religion to engage in this activity, which it is not. Freedom of religion does not allow you to break the law. If freedom of religion allowed you to break the law, then Mormons could have multiple wives, and men who practice Sharia law could stone women to death in the streets. Like that is absolutely not true, and a lot of newspapers got that wrong, saying that they have a constitutional right to engage in this activity. That is not what any of the decisions said. The decision simply said police departments and law enforcement have discretion as to what laws they can and can't enforce. So that's that's misinformation that's out there all the time. There's no right in religious freedom or any freedom to break the law. Otherwise, anyone could do that and say it's my religious right. You'd have no law and order in that respect. And there's plenty of cases on it, all the way up to the Supreme Court. So that wasn't an issue. I just wanted to throw that in because there's a lot of misinformation about that. So anyway, we just refiled the motion to renew, and that judge has now refused to sign it. I did an order to show cause for an emergency hearing on it because Kaporos is right around the corner. It's in a matter of 3 or 4 weeks. And the judge declined to sign. That was her response because she said the matter has been disposed. That was her reasoning. And she's actually wrong on the law because you can ask for the court to rehear a matter when you have new evidence. That's the whole purpose of the motion to renew. That's the whole purpose of it. So the fact that the case has been disposed is not a ground to deny signing my order, which would have just allowed for a hearing. So we're debating where we're going to go from here. I don't think this matter is over, at least from my perspective, from a legal perspective. I'm constantly trying to think of new things to do here. I got air samples last year in 2019. I just decided to get air samples. I got a team of experts out there. We got air samples, and I didn't really know what I was going to do with them, but there are toxins in the air, and we did actually use that evidence in the motion to renew. So I don't think this matter legally is going anywhere. I'm going to keep at it as much as I can, do everything we can to shut it down. If anyone has any questions, feel free outside of this panel. My website is marinojustice.com. Someone just asked the title of my organization. I have a not-for-profit called the Animal Cruelty Exposure Fund. That's more about media, but you can check out our website, animalcrueltyexposurefund.org, or my law office website is marinojustice.com. All my contact info is there if anyone has any questions or wants to reach out to me. But all I can say is if I have anything to say about it, this isn't over. And it's terrible what happens to chickens and all these animals. It's heartbreaking, and we all have to do everything we can to make it stop. So thank you all for this opportunity to tell my story and tell the story about this lawsuit.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Nora. We